Welcome to the MS&Me Radio Network, a division of the Multiple Sclerosis Global Support Network. The following program broadcast is an original creation by the broadcast entity. Discussion within the following broadcast should be used for informational purposes only and is not a substitute for professional medical advice or consultation. Before considering application of any broadcast content in the following program, please consult your healthcare provider. If you feel you are having a medical emergency, please contact your local health services for immediate assistance. MS&Me Media and the Multiple Sclerosis Global Support Network do not guarantee or warrant the accuracy of information in the broadcast to follow. The Multiple Sclerosis Global Support Network provisions broadcast services to program hosts. Information discussed in the broadcast does not necessarily reflect the views, opinions, or goals of the network and are solely those of the show broadcast host. Should you wish to host a broadcast, please visit our website at msmemedia.com and submit a request to become a program host. We thank you for listening to the MS&Me Radio Network. Enjoy the show.
Hi, welcome to episode number 12 of A Couple Takes on MS. This is Dan Digman.
Hi, this is Jennifer Digman.
And we're following up with you today. What we're talking about is really temperatures and the seasons and how much does MS affect you and your symptoms with changes in temperatures, changes in seasons.
And I'm feeling the urge to sing like a song from the 80s, Seasons Change, but I won't do that.
No,
because,
you already did.
Sorry about that. That was me strangling a very pretty song, but the seasons change. I hear over and over again, or I read over and over again on my MS Buddy app on my phone that other people with multiple sclerosis talk about how much the change in seasons and the change in weather affects them. And I think that, that's a really applicable topic today. That seasons do make a big difference for me. How about you, Dan?
Totally. I think that, I think that for most people, whether or not they have multiple sclerosis, just changes in seasons affect their moods, their feelings. Obviously, once the weather starts getting colder and darker.
And conversely, when it gets brighter earlier and the days are warmer, it affects people as well. So I think that change is something to be respected and understood, which is hard when you're living with MS, because really, do we understand anything about this complex, frustrating disease?
And I think just before we get started, really getting into it, just another quick thing, because we always think that just because you're listening, you know who we are, and just fundamental background. I'm Dan. I have relapsing remitting MS, and I've had MS for about 18 years, and this is my lovely wife of 12 years.
That
12 years.
hesitation.
Well, you have to do the math because we just celebrated 12 years,
yes,
and then because we're always looking at 13
13
years and stuff. So
you've had MS.
yeah, so my lovely wife of 12 years, Jennifer.
Thank you. Nice recovery, Dan.
That's just what I do.
My MS, I was diagnosed nearly 20 years ago. It'll be 20 years in November, and my MS is secondary progressive. And I no longer walk. I haven't walked for 15 years, which is a really long time. And I'm sure if you listen to our program, you know probably that it's a big part of my life, but I try not to dwell on it, but it does come up. Just like multiple sclerosis, Dan and I can say we don't dwell on our MS, but that's a huge part of our personality and our daily life. So.
And I think it's just something that we push through and get through, and I just think then obviously we're a couple, but these are a couple takes because I give you the perspective of from a man and a caregiver who has relapsing remitting MS, and Jennifer as a woman.
And a caregiver who has secondary progressive MS.
So with the boilerplate explanation of who we are out of the way, let's move on then to talking about the seasons and the temperatures. And I think you talked, Jennifer, about the applicable to today, and it's a really kind of a bummer of a thing today.
Yeah, it's kind of a very big bummer of a thing. Today is Central Michigan University's homecoming, and we live here in Michigan. And we were going to go to the game today. It's outdoor football game, and we didn't go because it is pouring and it is so incredibly cold. I think you said it was like 56 degrees.
Game time temperature of 56 degrees, and I think
Brr.
and just that, we're both CMU alumni, and actually I work at Central, and truly the football field is like,
Less than a mile away.
Less than a mile away. We can see the scoreboard from our house, but it's just the reality that it's 56 degrees out and it's raining, and I think we tried sitting out in the rain of a football game a couple years ago, thereby then realizing that
I have an electric wheelchair, and that does not go well with rain, because I've done it twice where I've thought, oh, a little bit of rain won't hurt me, or it won't hurt my grape ape, which is the name I lovingly refer to my big power chair, grape ape, and I thought it would be fine, but then it shorts out, not like literally shorts out, but it just won't work. And this is how I get around. So, and I can't go to a mechanic to get my chair fixed. I have to go quite a ways to get it fixed. So sitting outside in a football game just doesn't make sense. There's too many ramifications.
And I think tying this in then, it was like just 3 weeks ago we were at the game and we were recognized on the field, and
Yay!
And it was, honest to God, it was 110 degrees on the field is what they said. So then think of that, 110 degrees, 3 weeks later, 56 degrees, and it's the cold and temperature, and just how does that impact, well, Jennifer, how does it impact you and your MS?
I don't care for it, but similarly, I wasn't a big fan of it when it was 110 degrees. That heat, I'm not. I want to say I'm a fair weather fan. I like fair weather. I like it to be moderate, somewhere between the high 60s and the low 80s. And I don't know where I can live where it's like that year round. But if you know that place and you want to shoot me an email, that would be super nice of you. Thank you. But I think that the weather, when it's really extreme, really cold or really hot, it makes a big effect on me. How about you?
Yeah, I think that, and that's what they talk about with multiple sclerosis, and just how the extreme temperatures, and I know I used to think that it didn't bother me, but back when I used to run, I saw the impact that heat has on me. I know it wasn't that I couldn't run anymore in the heat, but I remember the time I knew that as I would run, I would get like little blind spots in my eyesight, where they were, you say, like floaters, and everything. And I know when I would have to, and I told you this, so don't get mad at me. I told you, and you freaked out when I told you. But it's like there was a time where I had to cross a highway towards the end of my route every time, and I wouldn't trust my eyesight, because you could get a blind spot of a car coming by. So I had to truly entrust my hearing.
And yeah, shortly after Dan told me that, he stopped running as much, because while he has great hearing, that's a huge risk with MS when those extreme temperatures, when you get overheated or just get too warm and your MS symptoms rear their ugly heads. And to hear that Dan is playing chicken on Mission, because that's a road here in Michigan, this street is Mission, and he's playing chicken because he can't see if traffic is coming and he's judging it by his ears. And I thought that's too risky. And so fortunately Dan did not stop running. He just stopped running outside and playing chicken, which was good.
And I think that that's, you know, the impact of MS on, you know, or with the heat and what that does to me. I know that obviously, yeah, it wears me out more, but I think as far as the sight when really hot, but then for you, I know when you're sitting outside and in the heat because you love your son,
I love the sun,
you're getting your vitamin D, which we all.
is very important.
But I also know don't get too hot, because what happens when Jennifer gets too hot?
Bad, bad, bad things. I lose a lot of my ability to stand or to even drive my wheelchair, to use just my right hand. When I'm overheated, my right hand is just limp and I can't drive my chair. And unfortunately, I don't have the best sense. And I'm going to use that, and I'm trying not to have an excuse, but I don't have the best sense when I'm getting too warm. And that's why Dan's an awesome caregiver, because he will just say, no, Jen, it's getting a little warm. Why don't we think about going inside? And I may grumble and groan about having to go in, but at least I can drive my chair in, where if I sat outside another 5 minutes, Dan's driving my chair and me inside.
And then we have to sit and just, you know, for you to truly cool down, which, you know, when we all think about this, and I know how it is for everybody out there listening to us, but it's just like these changes or these temperatures, you know, I think it affects everybody. I think it just impacts us because of the symptoms we have.
Right.
And to which I'd say, you know, as we talk about the heat, now that it's fall and things, don't shoot the messenger, my love, but winter is coming.
Brr.
But it's just, well, speaking of boo, then I was just like, what happens? And it could be great if it actually did get down really cold around Halloween, because what happens to Jennifer when you get too cold? You turn into who?
Frankenstein. That's a nice segue for that.
Do you like that analogy?
That was very good, Dan. Very well done, Dan Dickman.
Why, thank you.
You're welcome. But when I am particularly cold, I remember I had a dog when I was younger, and as pet owners, we have to clean up their messes. I don't need to explain any more than that, I hope. But I was cleaning up Buster's messes, and it was cold, and all of a sudden, when I was still able to walk shortly after being diagnosed, I was not able to bend my knees. The cold temperature really, really made me like Frankenstein, and that's when I realized, respect the weather and don't go out and clean up dog
messes.
when it's very cold outside. And like you said, don't do it when it's really warm either, because that extreme is just too much to handle.
And I think what I've noticed with me and the cold temperatures is my hands are numb. I don't know about, well, obviously yours are, and for everybody out there, as far as think of the numbness you have. When I get cold, my hands do not function, and I can't. That's why I hate, you know, like when we have to use the tie downs for your chair and don't have the easy lock. I have a really hard time when it's so cold to even feel my hands to, you know, put the latches on your locks to lock in your chair, and that's.
And just for those of you that may not know what Dan's talking about, with my electric wheelchair, I can lock in to our van when we're going out in public and we're going places, and it's a very nice system. But occasionally I won't be able to lock in, or I'll be using a different van or a different chair or something, and there are tie downs that are straps that lock my wheelchair in for safety. And those, you know, if it's cold, that's really difficult for Dan and his multiple sclerosis. So those extremes, those changes, those affect you. And that's something that we have to be respectful, to try not to go out when it's freezing cold. So.
And I think those are really the, you know, Jennifer and I were talking earlier, and it's like we can't sit here and give you ways to treat your disease or make your disease better, but we've, collectively have had nearly 40 years of experience living with this disease. So, I mean, just what we can do is give you ideas and thoughts and perspectives on ways to have a better life or a better quality of life in terms of like just things to look for. And I think that, with the temperature changes and everything, it's like respect Mother Nature, because I don't want to say she and MS are in cahoots, but
they're in cahoots. When Mother Nature is angry and she has it be incredibly hot or incredibly cold, it seems that multiple sclerosis jumps on the bandwagon with her, and she's going to make your MS or make my MS flare up because MS doesn't appreciate those drastic changes in temperature. But simple things like when I get overheated, Dan will bring me inside so I can cool off, or he'll get me a cold drink. Or we have members of our support group, our MS Society support group, we have cooling vests. Or if it's really cold, certainly don't underestimate the power of a blanket. Coming inside, as we are getting closer to that awful word winter, I know that Dan has prepared the van so that we have blankets just in case, so that neither one of us will get too cold, and we have our hats and our gloves. And I know it's October, but it is never too early to prepare for the drastic changes in weather. And that, though, being proactive and not letting the heat sneak up on you or the cold sneak up on you is a really important thing to improve the quality of life, because nothing's worse than getting overheated and not being able to cool off, or conversely getting too cold and not being able to warm up. It can ruin the day for you.
And I think then looking at, we talk about temperatures and everything, what about the changes in seasons? And it's just like, which is harder for you, changing from warm to cold or cold to hot? And if you could, I mean, don't say you would live where it's 80 degrees, but I mean, just because there would be changes in temperatures. I mean, which is harder for you as living with MS?
I find that going from hot to cold is really that change. I don't know if it's because, and I'm not a doctor, but I think my blood thins out when it's warm in the summer. And then with Michigan, we drastically often change seasons. So my blood's a little thinner, and then boom, it gets cold. And that change is pretty drastic. And as a matter of fact, when I was diagnosed with MS, it was a season. I was diagnosed in November. And I think that change in temperature, in the fall, and just that season change is when, that was hard for me. And it typically, we're going into fall right now, and I'm just feeling like a little more run down and a little more tired, so I need to respect that. What about you?
Well, I know that when I was actually diagnosed in February, but I think a lot of the things that led me to go to the doctor to be tested and stuff, it was around like August, September, when I started having the unusual numbness all around. That's when they started doing the testing and stuff. So I think that for me, it was in the late summer, early fall that I had the biggest noticeable symptoms, and then actually diagnosed in February when all was said and done. I think that's concerning. I do know that there was granted it was from 7 years ago, but there was an article from 2010 on WebMD just talking about the increased lesions were it's more active between March and August for people with MS who have major increases in the lesions within those months, which I thought was interesting because, but again,
that's a big change in seasons.
Yeah.
And that is going, interestingly, it's different for me. I find it's easier to go from cold weather to warm weather. No, wait, I find it's easier. Yeah, to go from cold weather. I've got multiple sclerosis. I'm sure you all understand that cog fog when you have that moment where you're like, what was I saying? But anywho, when I go from the winter to the summer, it's a little easier. But going from the summer to the winter, which is when I was diagnosed, that's tougher. And I find, that's interesting. And I would like to see if they updated that study or if they revisited, if they still show the same kind of information and if they still have the same results.
And I think that's where, for everybody out there, let us know. I mean, we usually talk at the end like, oh, send us emails, blah, blah, blah. But I mean, send us emails. It's Digmann, it's DIGMANND at MSN.com. Just let us know where you're at with this, how the temperature changes in seasons impact you, and if what helps you make it through with that, with the changes in seasons. I think.
And you can always reach out to us on Facebook or Twitter. On Facebook, we're Dan and Jennifer Digman.
And Twitter is DanJenDig. And I think also just Instagram, it's Digman D.
It's a social network sort of society, but Dan and I are lucky we have each other to speak with, and we have members of our support group, and we have a lot of outlets. But talking today, this is an outlet where we would love to hear from people who have questions. And there's no such thing as a question that's inappropriate. Well, I'm sure there are some inappropriate questions, but no one knows everything about multiple sclerosis. And we would love to be informed about something or share some of our knowledge with the people listening, with you listeners. So please reach out to us and see if seasons are something that affect you. I know, like I had mentioned earlier, Healthline has an MS Buddy app, which if you have a smartphone, like a iPhone or a Droid, you can get this app through the different app stores, and it's like having a virtual self-help group at your fingertips, because you can chat with these different MS buddies, and it's a really a neat way to connect with people if you don't have a support group in your community or you can't get out to talk with people face to face. It's really nice to hear other people's experiences.
And I think we do have each other, but that's just with the two of us. So that's where you come in, to be able to help us out with your experiences, your stories, your perspectives. I think that it's just like it makes the world smaller. But I think it's just with the seasonal changes and everything. But I think part of what I deal with, and you do, but not as much as I do, is dealing with allergies, and whether it's in the fall or in the spring when the allergies really hit. And I know that for me, the allergies, and anytime I'm dealing with some other health issue, like when I've got a fever or I have a cold, I always feel like my MS symptoms intensify with everything that's there. So I know when I'm running a fever, my hands are extremely numb, and I have a really hard time helping Jennifer. And so that's why the spring, you talk about going from cold to hot, I'd rather go from hot to cold. And,
Interesting.
And I think it's just because I don't have allergies in the fall, but it's in the spring when that hits. It's in the
spring, and that is interesting. But I think knowing when it's worse for you, that's important to have that knowledge. But I was thinking, you talk about allergies, and there was a story in the medical news today, earlier this week, that MS could be reversed with existing allergy drug. So the story on medical news today is talking about an allergy drug that could improve nervous system function in patients with multiple sclerosis. So I've told you I've been diagnosed for almost 20 years, And still, I see headlines like that and I get really excited about the promise that my MS could be treated. And I read the whole article, which is very long, and I'm not trying to be negative, but just it talks and you read, and then it ends that basically it's a small study and the treatment is not all that amazing, and the results, and the end result is just that it's too early to have definitive results. And I just think that that's irresponsible. And maybe I'm a little sensitive because I have been living with the disease as long as I have. But just to read a headline that sounds so promising, then you read the whole article and you're like, oh, yeah, no, you didn't say a whole lot. So I guess that's one piece of information I would offer to my newly diagnosed brethren is don't get too excited. I mean, certainly get excited, but just you need to read headlines and read through articles and just set yourself up for the reality that maybe, yes, new things are on the horizon and drugs are changing, but just don't be disappointed.
Well, these changes don't happen overnight, and I think that's the big thing. Is just the realities. We think that finally they've made this huge breakthrough that's going to help me today, but it's just the reality that things are still a long way, several years off. So I think it's just being able to manage and pace yourself in terms of the excitement levels. Like, yeah, absolutely, it's promising that it's here, but I think maybe that's with us, maybe because we've had it for so long, we get excited because we think finally there's this breakthrough that we've been waiting nearly 2 decades for.
Right, and it's just the reality. Something will happen and something good is around the horizon, I'm sure. And don't give up hope, but just be realistic and know that, when it happens, it's going to happen for all of us, and we have to stay hopeful.
And so please check in with us and let us know your thoughts on seasonal changes and changes in temperatures.
And how do you deal with the headlines? Do they get you excited or do you feel negative? How do seasons changing and headlines affect you?
And so with that, thank you again for taking the time to spend with us with this show, a couple of takes on MS. We want to thank MS&Me Radio Network for having us on the show, and also then we want to thank Blue Giraffe Kid for composing the theme song for our show. And thank you again for listening. This is Dan Digman
and Jennifer Digman. Have a good week, and we'll talk to you soon.